Good afternoon and warmly welcome to this webinar on the work from home revolution. My name is Daniel Lind and I work as a research director at a trade union related think tank called Arenagruppen. And in that position, I'm responsible for a project on productivity in labor markets financed by the 5 unions within Swedish industry. Our guest today is Nick Bloom. He's a professor of economics at Stanford University. And among other things, he's a world-leading scholar on the work-from-home revolution. Mr. Bloom, we are very honored having you with us today. The setup is very, very simple. First, Mr. Bloom gives his presentation for 30 minutes or so. Then we open up for question and discussion, including your questions from the viewers. So please state your short and sharp questions in the chat, and we will bring them up later on. All in all, we have 60 minutes at our disposal. And having said this, Mr. Bloom, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I know this is virtual. I was just saying, oddly enough, I've been to Sweden 3 times in the last year. So I was there SMS, House of Finance and the Riksbank. So yeah, I have some sense of, I'll show you what I'm going to talk about. But yeah, I know this is virtual, but it would be nice to be back, although probably not this time of the year. I guess it's California is probably a better bet in January. Okay, so why don't I share my screen?
Thanks.
And I'm going to talk about, I'll get rid of hide floating control. Whoops, hide meeting. Great. So I'm going to talk about the future of work from home. So the background, why am I here? I guess I've been working on this for 20 years now. And I have to say it was very quiet until the pandemic. No one was that interested in work from home, although I got to meet President Obama in some event in 2014, did some stuff with TEDx, etc. There's some media around Marissa Mayer banning it in 2013. The big thing was obviously the pandemic. And since the pandemic started out in 2020, I have been talking to thousands by this point of managers, organizations, and collecting a lot of survey data. And I'm going to today show you a lot of this data. I'm going to talk about 3 things. One is the current state of working from home. I have some Swedish data. It's mostly US, but some international data. And I'll show Sweden actually looks pretty similar to the US. I don't know if you can hear my accent. I'm British by birth. So Sweden's kind of similar to the UK, Norway, much of Northern Europe. I'll then talk about managing hybrid and remote. And then finally, I'll talk about 3 impacts on the economy. And again, I have a little bit of Swedish data, in fact, to be precise, Stockholm data. Oh. So working from home, this is US data. This is probably the best measure of working from home. It is the share of full paid days that are work from home. And what you can see is back pre-pandemic in the US, it was about 5%. People did work from home, but it was pretty rare. You know, it didn't happen. Full days from home are pretty rare. Sure, mornings, evenings, but a full day didn't happen very often. During the peak of the pandemic, it exploded to 60%. Basically, anyone that could was working from home full time. And that was, every graduate, everyone that could was doing that. You can see it's dropping back down, down, down. The key thing to notice is it's now stabilized. In fact, for the last year, it's been flat. If you look at the December 2023 data, which is the last data we have here, versus the December 2022 data, you can see it's completely flat. So work from home is absolutely stabilized over the last year. And this is the new normal. So how does it look across countries? Here I have a little arrow pointing to Sweden. We collected data across 34 countries. And I have to say, we didn't know how to organize them. In the end, you kind of see a pattern. It looks more obvious when you group them together. So the English-speaking countries, Australia, Canada, US, UK, to some extent, New Zealand, seem to have the highest levels of work from home. So this is for graduates. Europe is next. Northern Europe is somewhat higher. So Sweden, on average, is having about a day a week for graduates, which is reasonably high. It's not quite as high as the US, which is more like 1.5, but it's quite a high level. You go down to Latin America, and particularly Asia, it's lower still. So Sweden is towards the higher end of Europe, but it's not quite the same as, say, the US or Canada. Another way to look at it is to look at office occupancy data. So this is data from JLL. It's a big global office company. And you notice towards the bottom, you have Stockholm, what you can see is for Stockholm, as a share of pre-pandemic occupancy, you're about kind of 75, 80%. So what we see here is North America, as in, basically America has the lowest occupancy rate versus pre-pandemic, it's about 50%. It has the highest level of work from home. Europe is somewhere in between, with Northern Europe having higher levels of work from home. If you go to Asia, work from home is much lower. So as I'll come back to, you should think of, I'm going to show you a lot of data for the US, but that looks relatively similar to Sweden, to the UK, to much of Northern Europe. Work from home is here to stay. For graduates, you're typically thinking about 1 to 2 days a week. Not, as I'll explain in a minute, not many people are fully remote. So here is data splitting the entire US labor force into 3 groups. Again, it will look very similar for Sweden. Daniel and I were talking earlier. I have to say the biggest group is fully on site. So the biggest group of folks, and many of them will be in trade unions, they're going to be frontline workers. Think of, people, obviously I've talked to a lot of manufacturing plants, certainly manufacturing plants, the frontline workers, the kind of line workers are there every day, day in, day out. Think of people in retail, food service, think of, I don't know, McDonald's, transport. They are the majority of the population. They're coming in every day. In fact, when you talk to companies, I've talked to like thousands by now of executives about this. We're doing so many exec ed and courses and, visiting companies. They often say there's a real issue is that the frontline low paid employees cannot work from home. They're kind of upset they're not getting this. If you look at who's doing it, it's the middle managers and seniors. So that moves down to the second group. Hybrid's about 30%. This tends to be grads, managers. If I think at Stanford University, most of my students, my MBAs go into this hybrid group. And then finally, there's a fully remote group. It's not very big. It's about 10%. And it's a lot of specialized roles. I was actually talking to the last time I was in Stockholm, I met the chief human resource officer, both of Spotify and Volvo. And Spotify are mostly fully remote. They do meet up like once a month. Volvo are mostly hybrid for their managers. So big Swedish companies fall across this distribution. Most of fully remote employees, though, are IT support, payroll. Spotify isn't actually very typical. Mostly they're in call centers, things like that, relatively middle paid jobs. It varies a lot by industry. So, Stockholm's almost certainly going to be higher than the rest of the country. Why? Because if you look tech, finance, insurance, business services, they have very high levels of work from home. You're thinking of graduates working on computers. They can tend to do it at home. If you look, in more suburban and certainly rural areas or smaller cities and towns, that tends to be more retail, transport, manufacturing. Their levels of work from home are lower. So I know there's, interest in manufacturing unions. Interestingly, having talked to a lot of manufacturing firms in the US, what they'll say, or construction companies, is, well, look, the frontline staff have to come in every day. You're working with equipment, with goods, sometimes with customers. As a result, the next level of management up pretty much in every day, and that kind of cascades up to the top of the firm. So even the CEOs, the CFOs of big manufacturing firms, they are working from home typically 1 or 2 days a week, but it's not as much as in tech firms because it's hard to manage, it's hard to lead if you're at home 5 days a week and your frontline employees are coming into the office or coming into the factory every day. Interesting, a big topic is on gender. Probably in Sweden, in fact, I'm pretty sure because I have some other global data. In Northern Europe and the US, Canada, there's not a big gender difference on work from home. So this is US data. I've seen UK, Swedish data. It looks kind of similar. Men and women move together. Where you do see big differences are in developing countries. So actually I have a graduate student, Sahani Jalota, and she is doing work on work from home in India. And in India, you see massively higher levels amongst women than men because women face harassment risk and there's a lot of sexism in workplaces. It's much easier for them to do it remotely. Or another example that was in the media is in Afghanistan, the Taliban banned women from working. And a lot of foreign companies said, they're going to ban it. We're going to have women secretly work from home. They kept paying them, but they just switched them to working from home. So in Sweden and Northern Europe, there's not a big gender divide, but that's, there is a gender divide if you go to developing countries. The big gap you'll see in Sweden and the UK and the US is over education and therefore over income. So we look here, you can see that people with a university degree, what in the US is called somewhat confusingly a college graduate, but think of these as university graduates, they have twice the level of work from home as non-grads. And so this reflects the kind of divide in the workforce between graduates that get this fantastic work from home thing and non-graduates that have to mostly come in every day. There's also some variation by age. So what we see is people in their early 20s generally want to, they come in and generally don't want to work from home that much. My oldest child, she's almost 21. She has summer jobs already. When I talk to my students, my MBAs in Stanford, they say, look, I want to get mentored and learn. So it's easier to do that face to face. I want to be social, go out, meet people, maybe go have a drink after work. And where they live, they're sharing, apartments of 5 people, and there's just no space for them to all work from home. By the time you get into the 30s and early 40s, people start to have more money. They have slightly larger, they may live in a house or a bigger apartment, and they have young kids. And so they tend to want to work from home. By the time you're getting up to the 50s again, levels drop back down again. So there's very much a life cycle in this, and it affects, companies should think about this affecting strategy depending on who they hire. So if you're, say, hiring a lot of 20-somethings, you're, making TikTok videos, you're real fashion, and you're hiring young people, you probably want to have a more in-person presence. If you're more aimed at hiring 30 or 40-year-olds that are more experienced, they're going to want to work from home more, and it may make sense to have more of a hybrid or fully remote setup. So what's driving this? When I talk to companies that, there's 4 things to think about here. The big 2 are over happiness, which I think about recruitment and retention, how much people like working from home. And the other one's productivity. So you've almost certainly heard some CEOs claiming it destroys productivity, it's terrible, etc. So what does the data show? What does the research actually show? So first on happiness, probably the headline number to think about is employees value hybrid about as much as an 8% pay increase. So again, I have this number in different countries. It's very similar. So I'm just showing that, the big US sample. People value the ability to work from home 2-3 days a week a lot. It's, they on average, they say, look, it's worth about 8% more pay. For some people, that seems a lot. For some, it doesn't seem that much. Why might that be? Well, you save on the commute, and that's a lot of time. Typically, for Europeans, for North Americans, you're saving just over an hour a day on commuting. You're also saving another 10 minutes a day from less time grooming, less shaving, less putting on makeup, etc. And B, you can live further away. It's more relaxing. It's quieter. You can do things. So people really value working from home. And this is a big reason why it's stuck. You're trying to recruit and retain employees. It's worth, an 8% perk. Why wouldn't you do it? In fact, I've talked to recruiters, and recruiters will say, look, there's now 3 big things employees really care about beyond pay. One is the pension. Second is healthcare. And the third is the work from home policy. And they say, look, if you don't allow people to work from home, you've got to basically pay them 10% more as kind of compensation. And in fact, one good study on this I have that's hopefully about to come out in Nature is we did a randomized control trial on 1,600 engineers, marketing, and finance professionals in a big multinational. So these are all graduates, about a third of postgrads, and they're in IT, they're in like tech, finance, these are kind of like, pretty high-end employees. And what the company did is it said they did a big lottery, and if you have an even birthday, so if you're born on the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, 10th of the month, you have to come in 5 days a week. And if you have an odd birthday, and if you're born on the 1st, 3rd, 5th of the month, you get to work from home Wednesday, Friday. So it's a big experiment. What did they find? Well, the first thing they found is just no effect on performance at all. Hybrid, people working from home 2 days a week had exactly the same performance as people coming in 5 days. So lines of code written were the same, promotions were the same, performance reviews were the same. We actually had the text of the performance review. We couldn't find anything there. So no performance impact. But what they did find is quit rates fell by a third for people allowed to work from home. So the firm was like, what's not to like? It's like no effect on performance. It saves us millions of dollars a year, because every time somebody quits, you have to go out, hire somebody new, train them up, etc. So the firm expanded work from home to the entire company. So this is the kind of reason why hybrid has become so popular, so standard. I think about 90% of US companies now allow their managers, professionals to work hybrid. Most typically will be allowing them to work from home Monday and Friday. A come into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The big reason is it doesn't seem to affect productivity, and it makes employees happy and reduces their labor costs. So then I've mentioned a bit about productivity. What does the evidence show when you look in more detail? So by this point, there's quite a few research studies on it. And the really important thing to analyzing the research is to be clear that there's two very different things. So on the left, I'm showing you 4 articles that are about fully remote. So this is where people work from home Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Next week, Monday, Tuesday, they're just working from home. They may be meeting up once every other month, but they're basically fully remote. The evidence here is pretty astoundingly very mixed. So some studies find minus 30%. They tend to be when people work from home in a rush at the beginning of the pandemic. It wasn't well managed. It was very disorganized, and productivity collapsed, really problematic. Some other studies, not so many, some find up to some positive plus 10, plus 13%. These tend to be really well organized setups in call centers and places where you can measure perfectly performance. On average, fully remote looks like productivity is maybe minus 10%. It's a bit harder to mentor and learn. It's a little bit harder to innovate. It's a little bit harder to build culture. Now, you may then say, why is fully remote 10% of the labor force? My own firm, my own organization, Stanford, has 2,000 employees that are fully remote, which I support. So how can that be? How can I say productivity is maybe 10% lower, but we're supporting fully remote? The reason is companies and organizations ultimately care about profitability. So fully remote, even if it was 10% lower on productivity, saves you about 10% on costs, first off, because you don't have to pay for an office. And offices are expensive. You save on all the money for the offices. Secondly, you can hire people outside of expensive cities. So in Sweden, it's going to be cheaper to hire people not in Stockholm, maybe in other countries, maybe in Poland, maybe in India, maybe in the Philippines, depending what they do. Certainly, I'm involved in, advising some companies in the US. They're hiring some of their support staff, some of their coders in places like Brazil. They'll say, look, maybe the Brazilian person is only 80% as efficient because, for whatever reason, but they cost 40% the rate. So it's dramatically more profitable. So fully remote may be slightly low on productivity, but the question on that is not so much, how does it affect productivity? It affects productivity. For profitability, it can be pretty positive. Organized hybrid on the other side. So there's 4 papers here. I briefly showed you one of them earlier. This looks like it's about flat. So people work from home typically Monday, Friday. So yes, there's less FaceTime, there's less, maybe mentoring, a bit less creativity or culture building on Monday, Friday. On the other hand, you save on the commute. You save a lot of time commuting, and employees spend some of that more time working. They're less tired. It's quieter. It's easier to work on in a quiet environment. When you add it all up, it looks like performance is about flat for hybrid. So that is why hybrid has become totally dominant. Employees love it, and it doesn't seem to affect performance. So if I was to I haven't mentioned rent and talent. For fully remote, you save on rent because you get rid of the offices. It's also easier to hire people. If you look at this, basically hybrid dominates getting people fully in person. So if you're a company, if you're managers and professionals, there's really no downside on average to let them work from home a couple of days a week. The upsides, it makes them happy. They're less likely to quit. It's easier to hire them. If anything, they're more productive. It's easier to hire people because if someone's only going to come into your Stockholm office 2 days a week, they can live further away because they're put up with a longer commute. So this is really the summary of why hybrid has become completely dominant. It's, I mentioned 90% of companies, the huge majority of companies now let employees be hybrid. Stanford, where I work, for example, faculty and staff only have to come in 3 days a week. So how would I manage this? Given hybrid so dominant, what are the thoughts on managing it? Well, the big battle is over coordination. So the battle is like this. So, I've even changed my mind on it. Early on, I used to think, look, if people are going to come into the office 3 days a week, let them choose their days. Let them choose which days they come in. They may say, childcare is easier on Monday, Tuesday, therefore I want to work from home on, Wednesday, Thursday, or my husband or wife has this kind of thing. But it turns out the problem with letting people choose is when you ask people, why actually would you like to come into the office? They all say it's about socializing with coworkers, working face-to-face, etc. So increasingly firms are moving towards being more coordinated, saying, look, the reason we come in is to work in person with other people. So there is no point if I'm in on Monday, Daniel's in on Tuesday, I'm on Wednesday, he's Thursday, I'm Friday. I come in, it's like the office is half empty, I'm on Zoom, I say, what's the point of coming in? So there's been a big push to coordinate. If you look at how that's happening, mostly larger companies are doing it either at the team level, that's that red big bar at the bottom, or larger companies are doing it at the company level. So company levels like Disney. Disney, for example, says you have to come into the office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but you have to work from home on Friday. The orange thing will be, say, Google. Google says you can work from home 2 days a week, but lets each team decide which 2 days they are. Turns out there's not really much of a choice. Fridays are totally dead. Like nobody's coming in on Fridays. Fridays, there's the head, Steve Ross, who's the head of a big real estate company in the US, said they just given up on Friday. Like nobody comes in on Friday anymore. Monday's kind of quiet. So if you're letting teams decide on 3 days in the office, you know, it's a reasonably safe bet they're going to choose Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it's not clear how much this choice matters, but it's worth, you know, it's worth making sure it's coordinated. Another change that I see is offices are being redesigned. So on the left is what I'll call kind of old-fashioned offices, lots of little quiet cubicles. The top left, if you recognize it, is from Mad Money, the TV show. The bottom left is a cubicle farm in a tech firm. So that kind of thing is going out. Like nobody comes in to work anymore to kind of, well, the plan is you shouldn't be coming in to quietly work in an office or in a cubicle because otherwise you might as well be at home. It's more space like on the right. So some little kind of booths if people do want to take Zoom calls, and otherwise much more meeting rooms, open space. So when people are in the office, they're working together, they're connecting up over lunches, trainings, and events. If they want to do quiet work, reading, writing, individual calls, they should really do that at home. The other big topic that's come up a lot is around performance reviews. So I've had a lot of discussion with execs, managers who've said, you know, it's really hard managing people when they work from home. In the office, I can kind of watch what you're doing. I can see, are you there typing away? When I walk past your computer, is the screen showing Excel or, you know, Word, or is it maybe on Netflix or Champions League? You know, are you basically working? I can kind of see if you're working in the office. Now they say, look, it's not perfect. It's maybe 5 out of 10. It's kind of a B grade for management. It's okay. It's not great. It's not terrible. You shouldn't really be managing by walking around and watching people. They say the problem is when you go and run work from home, you just can't see what people are doing. You cannot observe people at home. And so you really have to move from what I'll call input management, watching what people are doing, their hours they're working, and focus more on output, on outcomes, how they perform. And so there's been a big push towards much more performance reviews, output evaluation, stuff like on the photo on the right, collecting data, doing 360 reviews. This is one of the reasons why HR has become particularly increasingly important for companies, because this is very much something that runs out of HR, thinking about working from home, thinking about how to manage it, thinking about performance evaluation. So another big theme is increasingly good performance reviews so that you can let people work from home. And if Daniel's my boss, rather than saying, Nick, I want you at your desk 9 to 5, he can instead say, Nick, I want you to meet these sales targets, produce this report, deliver this chunk of code, and then you manage it. And if I want to go for a run in the day or go to the dentist or pick my kids up or go play golf, I can do that, but I then have to work in the evening to make up for it. So what are the impacts on the economy? I'll talk about 3. So the first is what's called the donut effect. I have a picture here for New York. I'm going to show you information on Stockholm in a minute. Basically, around the world, people have been leaving the center of big cities. So why is that? Well, think about in 2019, I worked in a bank or in a tech firm or in the government or whatever it was. I had to go in 5 days a week. So I want to live near work. Now in 2024, I probably only got to go in 2 or 3 days a week so I can put up with a longer commute. And what we've seen is about 1 million people in the US and probably something similar in Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if 1-2 million people in Europe have left big cities, and they have mostly gone to the suburbs of the same city. So it's not like if I used to live in central London, I'd suddenly go to, you know, Cornwall or Scotland. I go to the suburbs of London because I'm still going to go into the office 3 days a week. I just don't have to go in every day. So the donut effect has pushed people out to the suburbs. we see a similar thing. And by the way, I should say on the donut effect, that's why house prices in the suburbs and apartment prices have gone up a lot. People have moved out. So the cost of apartments, housing in many cities around the world out in the suburbs has risen a lot as people have moved out and they're bidding these up. Secondly, the same thing has also happened for retail spending. So this is different data. Here I'm showing you data from MasterCard, billions of credit card transactions around the world. Here I'm just showing you the US data initially. As people have moved out to the suburbs, they have taken their spending with them. So if I'm now working from home and I want to get lunch, or I want to go and buy, my husband or wife a present, or, go to the gym, I'm now going to do it presumably near where I live out in the suburbs. And that's pushed up spending in the suburbs, pushed it down in the city center. And this graph on the right shows the difference in city center minus suburban spending. And you can see at the peak of the pandemic, it was down 40%. It's still down about 10%. So there's still a permanent reduction in spending in the center and an increase in the cities, in the suburbs. Here's data from, 4 Nordic countries. I should be clear, not Scandinavian, since Finland is not a Scandinavian country, 4 Nordics. And you can see they show a similar pattern, a big drop in city center spending during the pandemic. It's partly recovered. I mean, if you look at Stockholm, you can see city center spending in Stockholm is still about 15% down versus pre-pandemic, 10% down. It's probably partly recovered, but this is permanent. People are working from home. They're spending more money in the suburbs, less in city centers. Finally, golf. So I don't actually play golf. I've tried. I'm terrible. I just gave up. But many people I talked to play golf, and they complained a lot about how hard it was to get a game of golf. So I collected data in another project on golf. I won't, go through the details, but we had amazingly good data on how many people play golf every day for about 3,500 golf courses across America using satellite data and some other, satellite and GPS data. What you can see is before the pandemic in 2019, people used to play golf mainly on Saturday and Sundays. Those, some on Friday. During the pandemic or post-pandemic, you can see golf has just exploded and people are just playing golf all day, every day. And when you talk to golf courses, they're saying, look, it's all these work from home people. They're basically coming in, they're playing golf on a Tuesday morning or a Thursday afternoon, and it's pushed up and meant that golf courses are running completely full all day, every day. Here's the hourly data. And here's for a Wednesday. This is, the middle of the working week. You can see before the pandemic, people would play golf, but it was in the mornings. They presumably then go into work after that. Now it's throughout the day. The only reason there's a drop in golf playing in the afternoon at 1 or 2 p.m. is in America, it's so hot in the South, you just can't play. It's just too hot to play. But basically, people are playing as much golf as they possibly can. The reason I raise this is 2 things. One, if you're a manager, this is probably some of your employees. And if they're not playing golf, they're going to the gym, playing tennis, going skiing, doing whatever. They're going to the dentist. Now, there's nothing wrong in that at all. That's totally fine. Actually, if an employee wants to go to the dentist and work for an extra hour in the evening to get their job done, that's absolutely fine. But it's why I mentioned performance evaluation, performance reviews are important, because a lot of employees are doing this. That's a good thing, but you need to make sure people do get their work done. The second is it's really twisted the economy. So think about offices. Offices, all the demand has been pushed into Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Offices are very empty on Friday. So you kind of compressed office and city center retail. Think of pret-a-manger in the center of a city. It's not selling that many sandwiches now on a Friday. All its employees or Starbucks are doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you look at leisure, golf, tennis, going to hair salons, gyms, that is now spread out throughout the week. It used to be very heavily on the weekends and the evenings. Now it's throughout the week. So the pandemic has kind of twisted the economy. Some things have become more peak load and some have become flatter. So finally, what about the future? I wrote a piece in The Economist end of last year saying, look, it's kind of like a Nike swoosh. We saw a drop in work from home from 2020 through to about 2022 as people return to the office. It's been flat. In the long run, it's going to pick up and work from home is going to grow. Why is that? The big thing driving work from home is the technology behind it is getting a lot better. So this is a figure showing the share of patents in the US Patent and Trademark Office, new patents that mention remote work, telework, work from home, and you can see it's rising pretty rapidly. Why is that? Well, this is, again, capitalism. If there's now 5 times as many people working from home as there was pre-pandemic, which is roughly right. If you're Google or Microsoft or Apple or any startup, you're suddenly thinking, wow, there's millions of people working from home. There's a lot of money to be made if we can come up with new technologies to support that. So living out in Silicon Valley, I talk to a lot of tech firms all the time, and there are incredible technologies being developed. On the bottom, that photo, that's at the Star Wars Jedi Council, where some people are holograms and some are in present. There are companies right now developing. I was at a dinner about 9 months ago, the company literally developing exactly this. They said it's, 2-3 years away, but these kind of new technologies will make it much easier to work remotely and mean 5-10 years from now, levels of work from home will be above where they are now. So to conclude, work from home is here to stay. In Sweden, as in the UK, as in the US, for a typical office worker, typical graduates, probably 2 days a week, typically Monday, Friday. The key to make this successful is just coordinate, make sure that employees come in on the same day. So their in-office days are kind of lively, social. They feel happy that they've come in, they've seen their co-workers, and also to focus on performance reviews rather than clock watching. And finally, offices are being designed to make sure that people can work together socially. I'm going to end by saying I'm on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. Twitter's kind of fallen apart a bit, but LinkedIn is great. So please connect up on LinkedIn. I post, 3 times a week, new research and findings on work from. I pretty much only post on work from home. And we also have a website, wfhresearch.com, which posts updated research. And I'll stop now and go to this Q&A. Thanks.
Many thanks for this, Nick. Very informative and clear presentation. Of course, I have a lot of questions, but I will start with this one. Your research, apart from work from home, is based on management research. When you were at SNS, you were discussing your research on management. And what is the main role of management in this transformation as you see it?
So, by the way, I put the slides in the anyone's welcome to use these slides. I just put the slides in chat. So if anyone, you're welcome. I'm an academic. There is no intellectual property on this. So you're welcome to freely share the slides. So management's main role is really just making sure this is successful. So again, about 60% of people can't work from home at all. And one of the first things is, we can talk about that. For people that can't work from home, imagine you're working literally in a factory and you have people working on the factory floor. They can't work from home. Some of the policies I've heard about to try and at least give them something is changing shifts. It's not always easy, but I was talking to a hospital actually that said, look, rather than having people work 8 hours for 5 days a week, they're now letting them work for 10 for 4, actually 3 for 13 if they want to. Not everyone wants to do it, but it lets them reduce commuting. So one thing's on that. I think the other big thing for management is being clear and communicating. So by this point, by 2024, companies should all have a work from home strategy, which days, how many days, they should be working also on performance reviews to make sure you can evaluate people properly when they're at home in terms of what they achieve. The reason for that is, Daniel, if you're managing me, I'd much prefer you manage me on output rather than inputs. Because when I'm at home, I want to be able to go and pick, as we were talking earlier, I just dropped my 2 youngest daughters off at school. And I want to be able to do that without, feeling like I'm missing work. So if I have to make up for it working a bit in the evening, or maybe I go to the dentist, that's fine. So that's the other big thing, is making sure it's coordinated. So when people come into the office, they're there together, and making sure people are evaluated based on output.
Okay, thanks. Another question is, I read some other of your papers, but you're talking about the labor supply effect of work from home revolution. Can you give it a short explanation on that for the viewers?
Yeah, I'm working with some folks in Sweden on exactly this right now, actually. So what is amazing about this is I'll step back. Work from home is worth about an 8% pay increase. So what you'd expect is a bunch of people who are marginal on working. When I think of like my parents who are close to retirement, if they used, they both had to go in 5 days a week. My mum and dad worked, one in the British government, one in the NHS. They were both working 5 days a week. If you'd said to them at retirement, you know what, you can actually only come in the office 3 or maybe even 2 days a week, they would have been dramatically happier and may have, worked for another 3-4 years. It's less clear with the NHS. Certainly the civil service, it would have been possible. Think of folks that have kids, they may go back to work a little early, a little faster after maternity, paternity leave. Employees with a disability. In the US, what we've seen is people with a disability have seen a huge increase in working rates. When you look, there are about, I know the American numbers, I don't know for Sweden, but it's going to be similar. In America, something like 20% of Americans of the workforce is defined as with a disability. With a disability here means you can't easily walk up 10 stairs, you can't lift, 10 pounds, you find it hard to sit at a chair for many hours, or about a third of them are mental things. Like one of my family members, she really doesn't like noise. So if you think of these folks, imagine you let them work from home in a quiet home environment. You don't have to put up with office noise. Or someone else I know, she has a colostomy bag, and because she had stomach cancer, and going to work bathroom is really unpleasant. She doesn't want to do that, but she will work from home. Someone else has back problems. So if you can lie on your bed, she has a frame, she clips her laptop in, can lie on her back and work. So all of these things can explain why there are a lot of people that are kind of marginal on working. If you let them work from home, they're going to work. As a result, this has meant there are probably, again, I know the US data best, but there's maybe about 1 million more Americans that are now working because they can work from home. Interestingly, this itself has then reduced inequality. So it's not just that, there are so many benefits. One is there are millions of people that are now working, that are paying taxes, driving growth, providing services. Secondly, those folks tend to be more educated, higher earners. As a result, as their labor supply increases, it's tended to somewhat reduce their salaries versus frontline workers. So inequality has actually been falling a bit over the last 3 or 4 years, because probably everyone listening that's a graduate, we've had this lovely work from home perk. We've decided we want to work a bit more. It's roughly pushed down our wages a bit. People that are on the front line that can't do it have had to put up with infection risk. Some of them have worked a bit less, and that's pushed up their salary.
But do you think that this labor supply will have a macro effect?
Yes, I think it's going to be. I think I step back. We've lived through just a horrible global pandemic, just truly awful. I mean, in some ways, oddly enough, Sweden may be one of the best countries in terms of the way it ran it. I'm no expert, but there's a big debate now, at least in the US, did we over lockdown? And, Sweden had a lighter lockdown, and I suspect Sweden maybe got it more right than the US. But whatever your views on this stuff, it was terrible. It was really terrible. Despite that, we're kind of almost back on pre-pandemic trend growth rates. The US is actually above it. I mean, pretty astoundingly, it's above it. One of the big drivers, I think, of that recovery has been the extra people that are working. So if you have 1-2% more of the population working, that's roughly going to feed into 1-2% more output. If that additional population comes over 5 years, you're gaining 1-2% output over 5 years. That is a lot of growth. Yes. So, and it's great. I mean, more taxes. For all of it cuts all of the rest of our taxes. More goods and services pushes prices down, helps combat inflation. It's like good on so many margins. So that, I think, in the long run is going to be one of the big dividends to work from home. I mean, obviously, one is we love it, so we all get to work from home. It's a big benefit. But two, the economy really benefits because there's more people working, and that's driving growth.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Then I continue with another topic here. In one of your texts, papers, you're talking about the missing productivity gains. Can you explain that for the viewers?
Yeah, I mean, that was so that's probably still going on, but I will, there's a long run data set showing that productivity growth in Europe and the US has been slowly declining since World War II. This is a very lot. I mean, I can step back and go back in the midst of history. So if you go back 2,000 years, productivity growth was pretty much flat. So up until the Industrial Revolution, it was very, very slow. If you look at people in, say they have good data actually in England. They look at people in 1500 England, they were not a lot richer than zero, like when the Romans were around. I mean, a bit, but that's 1,500 years. And they're only like twice, it's like basically zero. The Industrial Revolution starts and productivity growth starts to really pick up. So it's growing and growing and growing. Growth kind of peaks in about 1950. Incredible productivity growth. A lot of universities are really expanding. And then ever since then, it's been falling back down again. And a big question is why? And no one's quite sure. But one view is it's just, our paper's called Ideas Are Getting Harder to Find. It is just generally tougher to come up with new ideas. So, work from home, I think, is, a kind of higher frequency blip on that may push this up. I think the work from home has been good for growth, actually.
Okay. Do you connect this with, if you compare it to the AI discussion on future productivity? I mean, are they working together, do you think, or?
So the AI discussion is really interesting. So Eric Brynjolfsson, who's my colleague here at Stanford, was at MIT before, has long been saying, look, there's going to be a productivity miracle because all this new technology. In fact, there's a famous quote from the Nobel Prize winner, Robert Solow, about, he says, you see, this was in 1987 in the New York Times. He said, you see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. So we've had these computers, the internet. I mean, I'm on a laptop. This is incredible. I'm 50. When I first started working, I didn't even have my own computer. I had to share it with somebody else. So, this is astounding. But productivity growth, as we just discussed, has been slowly going downward. So like, what on earth's going on? And there's a lot of debate about it will come. We're going to see it eventually. What about AI? So, younger folks tend to get super excited about AI. It's like, it's amazing. ChatGPT, it's going to change the world. Maybe, but having been through the internet and the personal computer age, etc., and that hasn't really picked up productivity, it's less obvious to me that AI will. AI is going to be great. Is it going to be important enough to really boost productivity? It's less obvious. We've just been on this downward trend for 50 years, and it's going to take something pretty spectacular. Is AI that spectacular? It's going to be a bigger deal than computers per se, or the internet, or cars, or air conditioning, or the kind of things, vaccines. That I don't know, maybe. But I put it this way: I hold my breath. I am not certain, but we're going to see a reversal.
No. We will actually have Simon Johnson as a guest as a webinar in March on his book, Power and Progress, where we'll discuss AI. And also, I'm just now reading the book of Stephen Broadberry about the Industrial Revolution and the prehistorical views of UK. So I think it's really interesting to study these long-term questions. But let's state it like this. You are very positive about the future, about work from home. What should the main critiques be for you when you talk about this for those who are very skeptical? What do they say?
Normally, they're kind of talking at cross purposes. They're just talking across each other. So the skeptics, take Elon Musk. He's the most extreme. He's like really aggressively against work from home. He's normally attacking fully remote. But he's saying fully remote, where people are working from every day, reduces productivity. That may even be true. I don't like Elon Musk personally. I don't like his politics, but I don't drive a Tesla. But that may be true. But the big issue is not so much on productivity, it's profitability. And if you think about the economy in general, if we don't have to have nearly as many offices because people are working more remotely, you can use that space for people can live in it. You can use it for retail, for parks, etc. Actually, in Stanford campus, they tore down a library and just converted it into a park. It's beautiful. So I think people beating up, attacking remote, tend to attack fully remote. Most people listening are probably hybrid. Hybrid's much more common. Daniel, what's your working pattern?
Maybe 3 days at home per week, 3.5 days.
And you're at home right now, I'm guessing.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I'm at home. I'm actually in a spare bedroom because you can see this big bed. This is like it looks very professional, but it's just this angle. It's the only angle I can get. I work from home. I'm going in this afternoon. I'm out for meetings and stuff. Yeah, hybrid is great. Most people probably listening are on hybrid. That's here to stay. I don't get the sense personally it reduces my productivity. When you look in the data in the entire economy, it's not negative. So the other issue is some CEOs, to be honest, is they have a different agenda. So if you're Elon Musk, you love work. Your life is work. He probably works 120 hours a week. When he goes into the office, everyone's nice to him because he's the boss. And, he has billions of dollars invested in his companies, but that's not typical for, no other employees like that. So often when I talk to companies, the CEO is really keen to get people in every day because they just love work. They want to come in all the time. They're very successful, but they're also different. They're very selected. Senior middle managers, the rest of the company are quite happy with hybrid. They don't actually want to come into work 5 days a week, mostly.
But do you think the top management that wants people to be at work, do you think that they are also more in need of control? They think they get the physical control. The physical control gives them the managerial control, or?
A bit, you know, it's a great point. Now, I often are suspicious that people that are aggressively pushing for a full return to the office don't have good management practices. So if you are well managed, I mean, I'll give you a story, actually. So I spoke to Marissa Mayer. Marissa Mayer was the CEO of Yahoo. She was in charge when they banned work. There was a memo that leaked in 2013. I don't know if it was a big deal in the American press. It was all over the media for like a long time. Oh. And I interviewed her about a year and a half ago, and I said, look, what happened? And we had she's great. I had a kind of 45-minute discussion about it. She said, look, when I took over from Yahoo, they didn't really have very good performance evaluation systems. So it was hard to tell whether people were doing their jobs. So I started to put in these performance evaluation systems. And during the middle of that, we discovered there was a team that were fully remote. And so she said, well, if they're fully remote, how are you evaluating them? You know, how do you make sure they get their job done? And apparently everyone's like, there's silence, like no one's, you know. And then somebody says, oh, actually, we do have their logins, like how often they're logging into their computer. So she's like, okay, let's have a look at this data. So they pull the login data. And she says, well, turns out we discovered some of the employees hadn't been logging for 2 or 3. And I thought she was about to say hours. She said, turns out they hadn't been logging in for 2 or 3 weeks. And I was like, 2 or 3 weeks? Like, you've probably got another job. I mean, so you can't, you know, you need to have proper performance review process. And she said, what we did is we put in reviews, you give people targets and objectives and you evaluate them. And then we, you know, once that was up in place, we let them go back to work from home 2-3 days a week. So companies that are adamant really want people to come in 5 days a week for office workers, for grads that could work from home. And it's hard to, you know, my one suspicion is some of that is they're just not very well managed. Because if you're well managed, you know, I have a team of people I manage. I let them work from home 2-3 days a week. It's fine. I mean, I check in with them reasonably regularly. I don't need to be watching their desk all the time to make sure. I mean, you know, this is 2024. People aren't typically desk watching to manage people anymore.
No. Okay. Very good. We have some questions from the viewers. So I turn to them now to say, here's Eva, who asked a question about what do research say about women falling into the trap of more gender problems with hybrid work?
So there's a really interesting paper. There's a lot of gender issues, but in some ways, maybe the best answer, there's a really fascinating paper that I was going to put out, actually. I was going to summarize and put it out on LinkedIn maybe next week or something. It's called The Power of Proximity. Yeah. It's by Amanda Palais, Natalie Emmanuel, and Emma Harrington. So what they do is they take a tech firm and they look at, you know, I won't go through the details, but they look at people in person, working remotely, all kinds of things. What they discover is when you're in person, if you're a junior or kind of middle employee, you tend to do better because you get more feedback. So Daniel, if you're my manager, if I'm sitting nearby you writing code, doing work, I can keep asking you for help getting feedback from you. So I benefit more in person. You as a manager, it's less clear, actually. So the data is less clear because the manager's getting bothered and having to do more stuff. And in a sense, these are people writing code in companies. So they're less able to write their own code because they're helping others. Turns out women are both particularly good at asking for help and providing help. So what they show is if you're in this tech company, a woman that's within their first, I think, 5 years, you actually do substantially worse working from home because you're getting less support and you're less able to ask others for help. If you're a woman that's been there, I think it was like, you know, 10 plus years, you're much more productive at home because you're not being asked to being mentoring and helping people all the time. And so they said this is kind of this twist that it's kind of why there's also a short run, long run trade-off about working from home. When you're working from home, particularly fully remote, you kind of get your day-to-day stuff done really well, but you're not giving as much mentoring and training and support to other people. And so in the long run, it suffers. So that's definitely one angle. The other angle I've heard is, I just give you the fact, in our data, men and women have about the same level of work from home. Yes, women have a slightly higher preference to work from home. When we ask both genders how much they'd like to work from home, we're polling 10,000 people a month, month in, month out. So this is data from, I don't know, 200,000 people. You see that women would like to work from home a little bit more than men. When I've talked to managers, execs, there are two effects going on. One is they say, look, it's easier to work from home. I have, other stuff going on. For example, it's much easier to manage childcare, I tend to have a higher share of the burden of this stuff, and it's easier to do it. And that's why I like working from home. The alternative is almost the exact reverse of that, saying if I'm at home, if one of my kids has an issue, they come to me. And so, if, you know, I just end up getting bothered all the time and I can't get anything done. It looks like the first slightly dominates, but I definitely see both views. Finally, that's a very developed country view. If you go to India, things are completely different, because in India, the big issue is like harassment out of the off, you know, so there you see an enormous gender interest. So we have data across many countries. You see the interest in women versus men is dramatically increasing as you go down development levels.
But can it be the case that the men that appreciate working from home more appreciate because they can play golf, and women are more appreciate because they more can take care of the family issues?
We don't see that much in the data. So we have something called the American Time Use Survey. We have very detailed data on hours. What you notice is, interestingly, well, so multiple data, both men and women. If you analyze who wants to work from home, gender is a factor. By far, the biggest factor is actually having young kids. So if I was to ask you, you know, if I was to say, Daniel, if I was to only know one thing about you to explain your preference to work from home, it would be, do you have children under the age of 12? Turns out that's the most powerful predictor. If you look at the American Time Use Survey, you look at men and women. If you look at graduates, for graduate men and women, they both show a significantly higher time spent on childcare if they're working from home. And in fact, the increase is pretty similar. So for graduates, this is not the same as for everyone, but for graduates, and remember, this is people with young kids. So you're thinking about a 35 or 40-year-old graduate employee in 2023. So this is where gender equality is probably about as good as it gets. There, you do see a reasonably equal improvement in increase in level of childcare. The base level is still high for women. Like, this is men versus women, but they both go up about the same amount.
Okay. Thanks. Here's another question from Anna Öberg. I'll try to translate here. The income differences increases between groups, and those who cannot work from home, they usually earn less, but not when it comes to doctors maybe. But do you think this can polarize the labor market? Some people can work from home and some cannot, and kind of the relative utility of work for blue collars are reduced compared to the other group.
No, definitely. So this is definitely a big issue. It's been very contentious. It's also polarized politics. So what I would call populist candidates, think of Donald Trump or people that support Brexit in the UK. They tend to be right-wing. Their voters tend to be less educated, actually. Populists tend to have relatively, you know, they're not really attracting many university graduates. These same workers cannot work from home. So they tend to be quite against work from home. It's interesting, the kind of MAGA-type Republicans in the US hate work from home. They're always, you know, whenever they talk about it, they're negative. The Brexiteers in the UK are against it. Populists in Europe are against it. So you're absolutely right. Lower paid folks without university degrees tend not to be able to do it, are kind of, you know, often angry about it. Oddly enough, they've benefited, but maybe in a way that's not as obvious, which is the pay rates for frontline workers have gone up relatively faster than graduates have post-pandemic. Actually, I don't know about Sweden. I know in the US, the graduates' pay has gone up by about 10% less than non-graduates since 2020. That's almost exactly offsetting the 8% value of work from home. So if you're a graduate, you've kind of got relatively 8% less pay or 10% less pay, but you got this thing worth 10%. So you've been paid in a nice perk, which is work from home. If you're a non-graduate, you have to come in every day, but you've got more cash. So, but that's not that transparent. You just happen to notice if you work in McDonald's, your pay's going up. You don't realize probably it's because, you know, other people are getting work from home and it's working through the market mechanism.
Yeah, that's kind of the Arjen Dube discussion on the US. But in Sweden,
exactly right. I have that exactly that paper, author Dubé, and I'm trying to remember the third co-author, but precisely right. And their numbers, the most recent paper shows it's about 10% gap, and that's almost exactly the same as the work from home valuation.
Yeah, but in Sweden we have this centralized wage bargaining system, which means that we have a central wage mark for the whole of the economy, and then we have some wage drift locally. So we cannot see these market forces in the same way as you can in the US, as you say. So maybe the effect on wages is not that big yet, at least in Sweden. So maybe we have more of a relative problem here. Maybe in the future.
So Danny, do you not have, so in the US, if you go to my local shopping center, so I live in, on Stanford campus, actually, there's something called Stanford Shopping Center. It's a pretty high-end shopping center for Silicon Valley. Every single shop has help wanted. Like all of the stores, everyone has help wanted, because it's really hard to get frontline employees. They're all like $19 an hour, $20 an hour type jobs. That's because that end of the labor market is really tight. You can't hire people. If instead you go to Google, where they're paying people $200,000 a year, they're firing people all the time. And so but is that not the same in Sweden, that you have the bottom end is strong and the kind of graduate end is weak?
I think both ends are strong, but we have kind of a central wage mark that discipline the wage growth over time. So we don't see this big changes between years, I would say. But here another question from Johan. He says that a lot of women in Sweden go from part-time to full-time due to remote work. And do you see the same tendency in the US?
That's a great observation. That would not surprise me, actually. I haven't looked at it. It's a really interesting question, actually. We should look at it. So first, on the point, that would make a lot of sense. So look, if you previously were part-time and going into the office 3 days a week, like my sisters, I have two sisters, both at work, and they're very much in this. They were part-time, and actually now they've increased days because they can add extra days working from home. So they're not changing their commute. They're working more days. And they were kind of working a bit before, in some sense. They're just getting paid for what they were doing previously. So yes, I'd expect that to happen. That's what I would call the intensive margin. So given workers work more hours, I had been talking earlier about the extensive margin, that people work more. I think both will be in operation. So yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. People that work from home claim they work more time. It's kind of hard to measure. So it seems like people say, well, I'm saving 70 minutes a day by not commuting and not grooming, and I'm using some of that to work. The problem is, Danny, if we're in the office and we start talking about football, that's probably counted by the statistical agency as work. We count every minute in the office as work. If I'm at home and I'm your flatmate and we're talking about football, I may not think of it as work. And when, the census collects data from me, so it's actually very hard to measure. When I've looked at data where you actually measure this, you look at like people login times and VPN and messages, it looks like people maybe work actually more minutes from home.
Okay. Because that's one of my ideas or thinking, is that when you have the remote possibility, you can create groups from different parts of the world. In that sense, you can chat and work together more than just have a coffee chat with your normal colleagues. So you can form new groups, which may be more productive than just having a coffee discussion.
I totally agree. I put a post on LinkedIn that just generated an enormous amount of discussion, which was commenting on a paper in Nature, claiming that fully remote kills innovation. And the weird thing about the paper is, when I read it, I think it shows the exact reverse. I actually think I think people have got it 180 degrees wrong. So what they say is researchers, academics are becoming much, much more global. And they also show that the negative effect of what they call co-location disappears and it turns positive by 2010. And that also what they call co-location is sharing the same address. So even if you're hybrid, your work address is still the work address. So I actually think the fact that academics and researchers are working in many more global teams is exactly evidence of your point. Tens of thousands of researchers around the world whose whole job is to be creative have thought, hey, look, if Daniel, me and you co-authored together, we're going to do better than if I just only work with Stanford people. We can only do that remotely.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm totally on board. It's kind of look at what people do. Tens of thousands of scientists, they know what they're most productive doing. And if they're all doing something, they're all being more, they're working in more cross-country collaboration teams. It tells you that's likely to be productive.
Thanks. We just have to finish, but I want to finish with one question before we close down. And that is, when you as a researcher think about these issues, what are the main questions that you think would be the most interesting to answer in the 5 to 10 years?
Some of the ones we discussed, the impacts on labor supply, impacts on growth, gender disability impacts, productivity, short and long run. There's a lot of discussion about, well, maybe people are productive in the short run, but they're not being creative, they're not being trained. Another big fascinating topic is on business creation. So the US,
the startups.
Yeah, exactly. Startups.
Oh,
There's been a boom in startups from 2020 onwards. And is that because of work from home? One argument is, I don't know if it's a positive argument, but when people are working from home on the side, they can start up their own business. So if, Daniel, I'm working for you, I can get my day job done for you. I can probably also run a business more easily on the side. It's cheaper. I don't have to pay for an office. And that's why startups are booming. It's not obvious, but there's so many, this thing is so massive. Work from home is maybe the biggest hit to the labor market since maybe World War II, where we saw a huge increase in, not in Sweden, so I don't think you had mass mobilization, but the UK, US, all the men were mobilized, taken out of factories. And so women went into the factories to work. And then they discovered, not surprisingly, they're just as productive as men. And that kind of started that, long run movement. It's hard to think of a change that's been that impactful for labor markets as work from home.
Yeah. Just to finish out, as a trade union, we are really positive. Trade unions in Sweden are positive in work from home and the flexibility it gives. But one worry is like how to organize your trade union work in the particular firm. We discussed it before a little bit before the broadcast. But what are your views on this? Can trade unions be hampered, or is it just child diseases that we don't really know how to work?
No, I think I saw a paper, actually. Again, I put that out on LinkedIn about a year ago. Aruna, I'm blanking on her surname right now. She's at Berkeley Haas. Anyway, she has a paper. She runs an experiment in India whereby she's paying people to do these tasks and then promises them bonus. And what she does is she randomizes whether they're doing the tasks in person or whether they're all doing it remotely, and also randomizes whether she actually gives them the bonus they're promised at the end. And then, if she doesn't, at the end of the experiment, she gives everyone, she makes it good in the end, but temporarily she kind of cheats on some random set of employees to say, well, I know you hit your target, we're not going to give you a bonus. She looks at what happens. And it turns out if the people are working together in person, they all come in person to the manager and say, hey, look, we met our targets. Where is our bonus? Almost always they do that. If they're working as a team but remotely, they're much less likely to organize. So it's something like 80% complain in person, 20% remotely, because no one starts it off. And then at the end of the experiment, she pays everyone the bonus. It eventually is fair, but it was a great example of this is not so much quite about unions, but it's related. It's about whether workers organize themselves. Turns out when they're in person, they're much more likely to organize themselves. And in this case, it was a fair grievance. She did deliberately cheat them and then eventually tells them, you're good, you made a mistake. But that was pretty fascinating.
That have to be the final words. Many thanks for you, Nick Bloom, for giving this 60 minutes of presentation and discussion. Thank you very much. And now we close down for today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Daniel.